The skyline of London shimmered under the night sky, the River Thames glinting like silver beneath the lights while every glass tower reflected the golden glow of the city. In Mayfair, the rooftop bar of one of the city's most exclusive hotels floated above the chaos, a world reserved for the elite, where soft jazz mingled with hushed conversations and the clink of crystal glasses. At a corner table sat Alexander Hayes, a 32-year-old billionaire whose empire, Hayes Global, had redefined financial security across continents. The Financial Times called him a prodigy. Rivals feared his ruthless efficiency. Investors worshipped him and employees respected him. Dressed in a sharp Savile Row suit with eyes the color of storm clouds, he looked every inch the man in control. Yet behind that steel facade lay a loneliness he never admitted to anyone. He held a glass of aged scotch, untouched as he stared out at the glowing skyline and pretended not to notice the hollow ache in his chest. He hadn't come looking for company, but fate did not ask permission. The elevator doors slid open and Emily Clark stepped inside the bar, her wide blue eyes filled with hesitation as though she had walked into a dream. At 24, she was a nursing student balancing two part-time jobs, every paycheck devoured by tuition fees and her father's medical bills. She had never been in a place like this, but tonight a friend had convinced her to take a rare break, though the friend backed out at the last minute, leaving her alone. Her dress was a simple navy piece from a charity shop, modest, yet elegant in its fit, her golden brown hair loosely pinned with strands framing her face. She could feel the stares of wealthy patrons who instantly recognized she didn't belong, but she lifted her chin with quiet defiance. Alexander noticed her the moment she entered. Surrounded by polished diamonds, she was raw and uncut, striking because of her simplicity. No designer labels, no false charm, and most of all, she wasn't looking at him like a prize to be won. Their eyes met across the room, and for a brief second the world seemed to stop. Emily's breath caught and she quickly looked away, but the faint smirk that touched his lips revealed he was already intrigued. She took a seat at the bar, clutching her bag as if it could shield her, and ordered the cheapest cocktail on the menu in a steady but soft voice. Alexander's curiosity deepened. Women here flaunted wealth with champagne, yet she chose modesty. He turned his gaze to the skyline again, though he already knew he would not ignore the pull she created. Alexander Hayes was a man who acted on instinct, and instinct told him this girl was unlike anyone else. Emily told herself she was invisible, yet she felt the heat of his attention. Against her better judgment, she glanced again, only to find his eyes still locked on her. Heat rose to her cheeks, her grip tightening around the glass as her heart raced. Alexander finished his scotch in one slow swallow, adjusted his cuffs, and crossed the room with purposeful strides that made people instinctively move aside. Emily felt the shift in the air before she even turned and saw him towering beside her, his gray eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "You don't look like someone who drinks alone in a place like this," he said, his voice low and commanding. Emily forced herself to answer, her nerves betraying her. "And you don't look like someone who starts conversations with strangers." The faintest smile curved his lips. "Maybe tonight is different." The spark between them flared instantly, undeniable. Alexander leaned against the bar, his presence overwhelming, and Emily's pulse quickened. She told herself to look away, to remember she didn't belong, but she couldn't. Their moment was broken by a group of drunken businessmen at the far end of the bar. One of them, a man with a gaudy gold watch, swaggered toward her and slid onto the stool beside her with predatory arrogance. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, leaning close. Emily stiffened, her voice firm but polite. "I'm fine, thank you." He ignored her protest, reaching for her glass. "Let me buy you something better than that cheap drink." Before his hand could touch it, Alexander's grip closed around his wrist, strong and unyielding. His voice was ice. "She said she's fine. When she says she's fine, you listen." The man faltered, trying to laugh it off. "Relax, Hayes, we're all friends here." Alexander leaned in, his hold tightening just enough to make the message clear. "We're not friends. Leave." The man pulled back, muttering curses as he retreated, his group scattering quickly. After him. Emily let out a shaky breath, her heart pounding from the confrontation. She turned to Alexander, her voice soft but edged with frustration. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I could have handled it," she whispered. "Maybe," he said with a faint, disarming smirk. "But why should you have to?" For a moment, the ruthless billionaire looked almost human, almost protective, and that unsettled her more than anything. She shook her head, trying to hide the warmth in her cheeks. "I don't need saving." He leaned closer, his whisper husky. "I didn't save you, Emily, I claimed you." The words stole the air from her lungs. She should have walked away, but something inside her already knew. Leaving him would not be so simple. The chill of London's night wrapped around them as Alexander Hayes and Emily Clark stepped out of the rooftop bar. The city pulsed below, alive with headlights, laughter spilling from pubs, and the restless heartbeat of the capital. Emily had promised herself she would leave alone, but when Alexander offered to walk her out, her lips said yes before her mind could catch up. They moved down the pavement, his stride purposeful, hers hesitant, her heels tapping softly against the stone. She hugged her coat tighter, the borrowed warmth of the city mixing with the dangerous warmth of his presence. Alexander glanced down at her, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "You seem nervous," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. Emily lifted her chin. "I'm walking through London at midnight with a billionaire I just met. Nervous seems reasonable." A rare chuckle escaped him, low and unguarded. "Fair point. But if I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't be wasting time on small talk." Her lips curved despite herself. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "You tell me," he replied with a smirk, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. They turned onto a quieter street where trees wrapped in fairy lights lined the path toward Hyde Park. The noise of the city softened, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional passing car. Alexander slowed his pace, his hands slipping into his pockets with the ease of a man who had all the time in the world. "So," he said, his tone dropping to something more personal, "what's your story, Emily Clark? People don't just end up in bars like that by accident." She hesitated, debating how much to share. Her instinct told her to keep her walls high, but something in his gaze urged her toward honesty. "I'm in nursing school. Most nights I'm working or studying. A friend convinced me to take a night off, but she canceled. I went anyway." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Brave. Desperate, maybe," she said with a soft laugh. "Sometimes I just need to feel like there's more to life than debt and 12-hour shifts." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw but true. Most people in his world would never understand, yet Alexander's eyes softened. "Most of the people in that bar wouldn't know what you just said if it hit them in the face, but you do. That makes you different." Emily shrugged, trying to mask her vulnerability. "I'm not most people." "No," he murmured, almost to himself. "You're not." They entered Hyde Park, the lamplight spilling golden pools across the pathways. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of damp leaves and fresh grass. Silence stretched between them, yet it wasn't empty. With every step, the distance between them narrowed, the pull growing stronger. Emily could feel it, his presence beside her like a current she couldn't resist. "You intrigue me," Alexander said finally, his voice low, intimate. "I don't get intrigued easily." Her heart fluttered, but she forced her brow up in challenge. "And what exactly do you think you see?" His lips curved into a faint smile. "Someone real. Someone who isn't trying to use me or impress me. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" "Maybe I don't belong in your world," she said quietly. "Maybe you're exactly what it's been missing." The words pressed against her chest, heavy with a truth she wasn't ready to admit. She looked away, focusing on the path, but the tension between them only thickened. His profile glowed under the lamplight, sharp, flawless, powerful, and yet beneath it all she sensed something else. Loneliness, need, vulnerability. When she dared to look up again, his eyes were already on her, burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. He stopped walking, turning fully toward her, and the night seemed to still around them. "One night," he said softly, his voice husky, roughened by restrained desire. "No promises, no expectations, just you and me." Emily froze, her breath catching. She had felt it building between them since the moment their eyes first met. But hearing it aloud made her tremble. She shook her head, whispering more to herself than to him. "I don't do things like that." "Neither do I," he admitted, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. His gaze locked on hers, unrelenting. "But something about you makes me want to break every rule I've ever made." Her pulse raced, torn between logic and longing. She should walk away, but the way he looked at her, as if she was the only woman in the world, shattered her resistance. Alexander reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with surprising gentleness. His touch sent a shiver racing down her spine. "Say yes," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. Emily's lips parted, words tangled in her throat. She thought of her textbooks waiting at home, her father's prescriptions, the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. She thought of the life she knew, safe, predictable, suffocating. Then she thought of him, of the way his eyes stripped her bare and made her feel alive in a way she had never known. Her resolve broke. She exhaled shakily. "Just one night," she whispered. Alexander's eyes darkened, satisfaction flashing like fire. "Just one night," he repeated, though both of them knew it would never be that simple. Alexander's penthouse rose above, London like a fortress of glass and steel, surveying the city as if it belonged to him. The elevator ride up was silent, but the silence carried a weight that pressed against Emily Clark's chest. Her fingers clutched the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white, and her heartbeat pounded against her ribs. She told herself she could still leave, that nothing was forcing her to go through with this, but the very thought of walking away felt impossible. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped into a space unlike anything she had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed London sprawling in glittering splendor, every building glowing like a constellation. The living space was vast, elegant, and undeniably masculine. Black leather sofas, polished marble floors, and abstract art that screamed wealth but felt cold, as though no one truly lived there. Alexander shrugged off his jacket and tossed it across the back of a chair, his movements casual but commanding. He turned toward her, his sharp gaze softening slightly as he watched her take in her surroundings. "Impressed?" he asked, his voice low. Emily swallowed, her throat dry. "It's beautiful," she admitted, though to her it felt more like a museum than a home. He poured himself a glass of scotch and offered her one. She shook her head quickly. Strong drink would only betray how shaken she already was. To her surprise, he set the glass aside without pressing, his respect silent but clear. The air between them grew charged, thick with tension that seemed to draw her toward him no matter how hard she tried to resist. Emily shifted uneasily, whispering almost to herself. "I should probably go." Alexander took a step closer, the corner of his mouth curving into something that was not quite a smile. "Do you want to?" Her body went still. She should have said yes, but when she looked into his eyes, all she saw was hunger tangled with something deeper, something that frightened her even more than desire. Slowly, she shook her head. "No." Satisfaction darkened his gaze. In 2 strides, he was standing before her, his tall frame towering, his hand lifting to brush against her cheek. The touch was gentle, but the energy behind it burned with unspoken promises. "Then stay," he whispered. Her breath hitched as his thumb traced along her jawline. His presence was overwhelming, but instead of wanting to escape, she leaned into his touch. Alexander bent his head, his lips hovering just above hers. "Tell me you want this." Her body trembled, her voice breaking. "I do." That was all he needed. His lips crashed against hers in a kiss that stole the air from her lungs. fierce and demanding yet filled with reverence. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her against him as though distance was unbearable. Emily clutched at his shirt, desperate, to anchor herself as her world tilted beneath her. The kiss deepened, his mouth skilled and hungry, his tongue teasing hers until her knees threatened to give way. He held her firmly, refusing to let her fall, and when he finally broke away, she gasped for air, her chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. "You drive me insane," he murmured, his forehead pressed against hers. He kissed her again, softer this time, his hands roaming her back in slow reverence. Every touch lit her nerves on fire until her body ached with need. But then his hand slipped lower and her body stiffened instinctively. Alexander sensed the shift immediately and pulled back, searching her face with sharp eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his tone unexpectedly gentle. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she bit her lip, shame and fear tangling in her chest. Her voice faltered. I've never..." Realization struck him like a blow. His breath caught, his chest tightening as he whispered the truth aloud. "You're a virgin." Emily's eyes flickered with vulnerability. She nodded, bracing herself for mockery, for rejection, for the cold billionaire to step back and dismiss her as an inconvenience. But Alexander's reaction was nothing she expected. Awe flickered in his gaze, laced with a raw possessiveness that shook him to his core. He cupped her face with both hands, his voice rough, almost breaking. "God, Emily, you should have told me." Tears threatened to sting her eyes. "I thought it didn't matter." "It matters more than you know," he said, his thumb brushing over her trembling lips. For the first time in years, his perfect control cracked. The knowledge that she had never given herself to anyone else and was here with him now filled him with an ache he could not explain. "I need you," he admitted, his voice raw, "but only if you're sure." Emily searched his eyes, and in them she saw sincerity buried beneath the steel. Her fear melted, replaced by something she could no longer deny. "I'm sure," she whispered. His restraint shattered. He kissed her again, slower this time, pouring every ounce of emotion into it. His hands moved with deliberate care, reverent in every caress, never rushing her. Emily surrendered, her nerves dissolving into need, her body answering his with trust. He guided her gently toward the bedroom, never letting their lips part. The glow of the city spilled through the windows, painting them in silver light as he laid her carefully on the bed. His eyes drank her in as though she was the most breathtaking sight he had ever seen. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Her blush deepened, her chest rising rapidly as his kisses trailed down her jaw and neck, setting fire to her veins. She clung to him, her fear fading with every touch, every word, every promise unspoken yet felt in the heat of his embrace. For the first time in her life, Emily Clark surrendered, not out of weakness, but out of choice. And Alexander Hayes knew he would never be the same again. The bedroom was dimly lit, the city's glow spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows and casting them both in silver light. Emily lay back against the cool sheets, her breath trembling, her body tense with anticipation. Alexander hovered above her, his gaze locked on hers with such intensity it made her chest ache. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered, his voice low and heavy with emotion. Her cheeks flushed, her chest rising and falling rapidly as his hands gently framed her face. His lips pressed along her jaw, then down her neck, each kiss slow and deliberate, sending shivers racing through her veins. Emily's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, terrified he might disappear if she let go. Alexander moved with care, giving her time, never rushing, his every touch asking permission without words. When he undressed her, his eyes never left hers, as though seeking her consent in every movement. She trembled, part nerves, part anticipation, but his presence steadied her. When at last there was nothing left between them, he paused, brushing, his lips against her forehead. "If you want me to stop, say the word." Her voice broke as she whispered, "Don't stop." With a low groan, Alexander finally claimed her, their bodies uniting in a rhythm that was both fierce and tender. Emily gasped, overwhelmed by sensation she had never known, her nails clutching at his back as if to anchor herself against the storm of pleasure and fear colliding inside her. He slowed, murmuring reassurances against her skin, his touch gentle, even as desire burned hot within him. He worshipped her with every kiss, every caress, every whisper of her name. This was not conquest. It was reverence. Time blurred as their bodies moved together, the world outside forgotten, lost in the symphony of their ragged breaths and whispered words. For Alexander, it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had taken countless women to bed, but never like this. This was not about possession or indulgence. This was surrender. When Emily finally clung to him, her voice breaking as she cried out his name, he held her tightly, his lips pressed to her temple as though he could fuse her into himself. His chest pounded wildly, his control shattered beyond repair, and when the storm subsided, he gathered her into his arms, refusing to let go. Emily lay against him, her body trembling, her mind dazed. She had crossed a threshold she could never return from, yet regret was nowhere to be found. In his embrace, she felt safe, cherished, desired in a way she had never believed possible. Alexander tightened his hold, his lips brushing her hair. "You're mine now," he whispered fiercely, "and I'll never let you go." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they warmed her like fire. Her eyes drifted closed, surrendering to the truth her heart already knew. She was his, completely and irrevocably. As dawn's first light spilled into the room, painting the penthouse in soft gold, Emily stirred beneath the sheets. Every nerve in her body still hummed with the memory of the night, every part of her aching with a sweetness that made her smile, faintly against the pillow. She blinked slowly and found herself cradled against Alexander's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, his grip firm even in sleep, as though he feared she might vanish if he loosened it. She had thought she would wake filled with regret, with shame, with fear, but instead she felt calm, dangerous, intoxicating calm, a belonging she had no right to feel in a place like this. She shifted slightly, careful not to wake him, but his hand tightened instantly, pulling her closer. His eyes opened, sharp even, through the haze of sleep, their gray depth softening the moment they landed on her. "Morning," he murmured, his voice rough from the night. Emily flushed, hiding her face against his chest. "Morning." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "How do you feel?" Her lips parted. The truth was complicated. She had given herself completely to a man she barely knew, a man whose world was light years away from hers. And yet when she searched her heart, regret was nowhere to be found. "Good," she admitted softly, her voice shy but honest. His lips curved into a slow smirk, though his eyes still burned with something darker, something possessive. "Good," he echoed, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "Because I'm not done with you, Emily." A shiver raced through her body at the intensity in his tone. She should have told him it was only supposed to be one night, that this could not go further, but when his mouth captured hers in another slow, devastating kiss, every protest melted away. The golden rays of dawn spilled through the massive windows, painting the penthouse in soft light. Emily stirred beneath the silk sheets, her body aching. From the night before, her mind replaying every touch, every kiss, every whispered word, she blinked slowly, adjusting to the brightness, and realized she was still wrapped in Alexander's arms. His hold on her was firm, protective, as though even in sleep he feared she might slip away. She lay there quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. It was strangely comforting, grounding her after a night that had turned her life upside down. She had thought she would wake drowning in regret, but instead, calm washed over her. Calm and something far more dangerous, a sense of belonging. She tried to shift, hoping not to disturb him, but his grip tightened instantly. His eyes opened, sharp and alert even through the haze of waking. They softened as they fell on her. "Morning," he murmured, his voice husky, roughened by the night. Emily flushed and buried her face against his chest. "Morning," she whispered back. He brushed his fingers along her cheek, uncharacteristically gentle. "How do you feel?" She hesitated, biting her lip. She had given everything to a man she barely knew, a man whose world was nothing like hers. But when she searched for regret, it wasn't there. "Good," she admitted softly, her honesty trembling in the air between them. His lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk, though his eyes held a darker fire. "Good," he echoed. His thumb traced her lower lip. "Because last night wasn't enough. I want more. All of you. Every night." Her breath caught, fear rising to meet the rush of heat in her body. She pushed lightly against his chest. "Alexander, we barely know each other." His jaw tightened, his voice sharp with command. "Then we'll fix that. We'll change it." She shook her head, panic flickering in her eyes. "You don't understand. I don't belong here. This world, it's not mine." Before she could continue, his lips silenced her in a firm kiss, deep and unyielding. When he pulled back, his whisper was a growl against her skin. "You belong to me now. That's all that matters." His certainty terrified her as much as it thrilled her. She tried again, her voice trembling. "This isn't my world. I can't pretend it is." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Vulnerability, almost a plea. His gaze searched hers, sharp but fragile at the edges. "Do you regret last night?" Her heart thudded in her chest. She froze, her breath uneven, but the truth pushed past her lips. "No," she whispered. Relief flashed in his eyes, followed by determination that left no room for argument. He pressed his lips to her forehead, his voice rough with emotion. "Then don't run from me, Emily." Her chest ached at the quiet desperation hidden beneath his commanding tone. She wanted to believe him, wanted to surrender to the storm that had swept her into his world, but reason still whispered in her ear, reminding her of the gulf between them. She slipped from the bed, the silk sheet wrapped tightly around her trembling body. She moved to the window, staring out at London stretched beneath her feet, her reflection faint against the glass. Alexander rose behind her, pulling on his trousers, his gaze never leaving her. "Talk to me," he urged, his voice low. Emily hugged the sheet closer. "I'm not someone you can just claim. I have a life outside these walls. Responsibilities. Struggles you can't fix with money or power." He moved behind her, his presence overwhelming as his hands settled on her shoulders. His reflection towered over hers in the glass. "I can fix anything," he said firmly. "You don't have to struggle anymore. I won't let you." She turned, her eyes wide with both fear and longing. "It's not that simple." His lips brushed her temple, his whisper sending shivers down her spine. "It is now. You're mine." Her body trembled, caught between the reality of her world and the fantasy of his. And though every rational thought screamed at her to leave, she knew one truth she couldn't escape. She was already in too deep. The following days blurred together, though for Alexander Hayes they felt sharper, more consuming than any business battle he had ever fought. He sat in his glass-walled office high above the city of London, but the spreadsheets, contracts, and reports laid before him meant nothing. His mind wandered constantly, haunted by Emily Clark, her voice, her touch, the look in her eyes when she admitted she had never given herself to anyone. For the first time in his life, he felt out of control. One night with her had left him restless, needing more, the thought of her slipping away gnawing at him like a wound he couldn't ignore. With a sharp command, he dismissed his assistant, then reached for his phone. "Find out everything about Emily Clark," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Where she lives, where she works, her family, her debts. I want it all on my desk within the hour." The machine of his empire moved instantly at his word. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, convincing himself it was necessary. If she wouldn't let him into her life willingly, he would carve a way in himself. Beneath that logic, though, something darker pulsed, an obsession burning hotter by the hour. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself back into routine, as though she could bury what had happened. She returned to the small cafe where she worked evening shifts, tying her apron like armor. Between serving tables, she bent over her textbooks, eyes blurring from exhaustion. She visited her father, still recovering slowly from surgery, and reminded herself why she couldn't afford distractions. She needed to focus. She needed to survive. But forgetting Alexander was impossible. Every quiet moment, every glimpse of her reflection, every whisper in her head reminded her of his touch, of the way he looked at her as though she was his. The memory terrified her, not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it far too much. One evening, after class, Emily returned to her tiny flat. She bent down to pick up the post, shoved through the door, and froze when she saw the stack of envelopes stamped with bold red letters. Overdue. Final notice. Payment required. Her chest tightened as she tore them open. Rent, tuition, medical, bills. Each one heavier than the last, each one screaming how close she was to drowning. She dropped onto the worn sofa, burying her face in her hands. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back down. Crying wouldn't pay the bills. She whispered to herself that she would figure it out like she always had. She had survived worse. Later that night, when she logged into her account to schedule a desperate partial payment, her heart stopped. The balance was clear. 0. Every overdue notice gone. Her hands shook as panic rushed through her veins. She knew instantly who had done it. Grabbing her phone, she typed furiously, "Alexander, did you pay my bills?" The reply came almost instantly, as though he had been waiting. Yes. Just one word. Confident. Unapologetic. Emily's hands clenched around the phone. "You had no right," she fired back. His answer was swift. "I had every right. You're mine. I take care of what's mine." A frustrated cry escaped her throat. He didn't understand. To him, problems were numbers on a screen, easily erased. But her life wasn't something he could balance like a ledger. She needed independence, dignity, the ability to stand on her own. And yet, even as fury surged inside her, another feeling stirred. Relief. For the first time in months, she could breathe without the weight of debt crushing her chest. She hated herself for it. She hated the gratitude hidden beneath the anger. 2 nights later, a knock at her door jolted her from sleep. She opened it to find Alexander standing in the narrow hallway, towering in a dark suit, his gray eyes stormy with determination. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past her into the flat without waiting for permission. Emily spun after him, her voice sharp. "You can't just show up here." "I can, and I will," he said, his presence filling the small space like a shadow. "You're mine, Emily. I won't watch you suffer when I can fix it." Her chest burned with fury. "You don't understand. This isn't your choice. You can't buy your way into my life." His jaw tightened, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not buying anything. I'm claiming what's already mine." "I'm not property," she snapped. For a moment his expression softened, though the fire in his eyes never dimmed. "You're not property. You're everything I didn't know I needed. And I'll do whatever it takes to keep you." Emily's heart pounded, torn between anger and the heat that spread through her at his words. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, the scent of his cologne curling around her. His voice dropped, soft but commanding. "Stop fighting me. You feel it too. I see it in your eyes." Her lips parted, a protest forming, but when his hand cupped her cheek, her words dissolved into silence. The fire between them roared back to life, undeniable, dangerous. "I don't want to be controlled," she whispered. His smirk was infuriating, devastatingly seductive. "Watch me. Before she could resist, his mouth claimed hers. The kiss was fierce, a battle of wills that melted into surrender. Emily pushed weakly against his chest, even as her body betrayed her, clinging to him, craving him. When he finally pulled back, his eyes burned with obsession. "I won't let you go, Emily, no matter how hard you fight." She stood breathless, shaken to her core. Part of her wanted to slam the door and never look back. But another part, deeper and stronger, wanted nothing more than to fall into him. Again. Emily paced across the narrow living room, her arms folded tightly across her chest as though the gesture could shield her from the gravity pulling her back toward him. Alexander stood near the door, shoulders squared, eyes locked on her with the unrelenting intensity of a man who refused to retreat. The silence pressed against the air until Emily spun on her heel, her voice sharp, every word trembling but defiant. "You can't keep doing this. You can't walk into my life, fix things I never asked you to fix, and act like I belong to you." His jaw clenched, his voice low but unyielding. "I don't act like you belong to me. You do. From the moment you walked into that bar, from the moment you looked at me like I wasn't just another headline, you became mine." Emily let out a sharp, almost broken laugh. "That's insane. We barely know each other. One night doesn't mean forever." Alexander stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his gray eyes storming. "One night was enough to change everything. Don't deny you felt it too." His words struck her like lightning, truth tangled with arrogance, impossible to dismiss. She turned away, arms tightening around herself. "Even if I did, it doesn't matter. I have to live my own life. I can't lose myself in yours." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist, not harshly but firmly enough to halt her retreat. The heat of his touch seared through her skin. "You're not losing yourself," he said, his voice rough. "You're finding what you've been missing." Her chest rose and fell quickly, anger sparking in her voice. "You think money and power make you right about everything, but this isn't business, Alexander. This is me, my choices, my freedom." His eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a growl that rumbled with frustration and something far more raw. "And you think I don't understand freedom? I built mine from nothing. I clawed my way to the top, and for the first time in my life, I'm willing to give up control because of you. Do you even know what that means?" His confession cracked the air between them. Emily's heart pounded, torn between fury and something dangerously close to surrender. She wanted to push him away, to tell him he was wrong, but when she looked into his eyes, she didn't just see obsession. She saw vulnerability. A man terrified of losing what he had only just found. Her voice trembled, breaking through the tension. "Why me?" Alexander's expression softened, though his intensity never wavered. "Because you're real. Because you don't want me for my money or my name. Because when you look at me, I'm not Alexander Hayes, the billionaire. I'm just a man. No one else has ever done that." Tears burned in her eyes, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his words. She shook her head, her voice breaking. "That doesn't change the fact that our worlds don't fit together. I'm drowning in debt, trying to keep my father alive, trying to build a future that doesn't depend on anyone else. And you live in a world where problems vanish with a single phone call. How could this ever work?" Alexander closed the distance completely, cupping her face with surprising tenderness. "Because I'll make it work. Because I can't lose you." His lips captured hers before she could argue, the kiss searing, desperate, a battle of wills that ignited into fire. Emily pushed against him, her fists striking weakly against his chest, but every blow dissolved into a clutch, pulling him closer instead of driving him away. Their mouths collided again and again, fueled by anger and longing, defiance and need. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breath ragged, his voice raw. "Say it. Say you don't want me and I'll walk out that door." Her lips parted, the words trembling on her tongue, but they refused to come. Her chest heaved, a tear slipping free as she whispered, "I can't." Alexander exhaled sharply, his hands tightening against her face as though he was anchoring himself to her. "Then stop running from me." She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, seeing the storm inside him. Obsession, desire, but also something dangerously close to love. "You scare me," she confessed, her voice trembling. His lips pressed to her forehead, his whisper fierce. Good. Because you terrify me too. The admission shattered something inside her. The walls she had built crumbled under the force of shared vulnerability. She wrapped her arms around him, clinging to him as though letting go would break her completely. For the first time, she stopped fighting and let herself feel the full weight of what had been growing between them since that first night. The clash between them hadn't destroyed the connection. It had forged it, stronger, tempered by fire and truth. And in that moment, as his arms crushed her against his chest and his mouth found hers in another breath-stealing kiss, Emily realized the truth she had been too afraid to admit. She wanted him. God help her, she wanted him. The ballroom glittered like a dream spun from gold. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors where London's most powerful politicians, CEOs, aristocrats, and socialites mingled in tailored suits and gowns worth fortunes. A live orchestra played softly in the background, the music weaving seamlessly into the hum of ambition and champagne-fueled laughter. Emily Clark stood just inside the entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs. The gown Alexander had insisted she wear clung to her like a second skin. Midnight silk brushing the floor with every uncertain step, she felt like an imposter among gods, a fragile secret in a world built for legends. Beside her, Alexander Hayes moved with the ease of a man entirely at home. In a perfectly tailored black suit, he commanded attention without effort. Heads turned, as he led her forward, his hand resting firmly at the small of her back, staking a silent claim that made whispers ripple through the crowd. Emily leaned closer, her voice almost a plea. I don't belong here. Alexander's eyes flicked down to her, unwavering. You belong wherever I say you do. The words sent a shiver down her spine, half thrill, half fear. He guided her into a circle of industry titans, introducing her simply as my date. Smiles came easily, but their eyes betrayed curiosity, judgment, disdain. Emily forced her own smile, her cheeks burning as she answered their questions with soft, clipped replies. She felt small, fragile, out of place, as though one wrong word might expose her as the outsider she was. Alexander, however, seemed unaffected by the undercurrents, or perhaps he noticed every single one and simply did not care. His hand never left her, his gaze flicking to her often, protective and possessive at once. Hours passed in a blur of clinking glasses and polished conversation. Emily tried to endure, but eventually excused herself, slipping to the edge of the ballroom. She stood by the tall windows overlooking London, the city lights blurred through the sting of unshed tears. What am I doing here? She whispered to her reflection. Behind her, footsteps approached. She stiffened, expecting another curious guest. But when she turned, Alexander stood there. His eyes swept her face, unreadable. You're overwhelmed. She nodded, her voice trembling. These people, they don't see me as one of them, and they're right, I'm not. He stepped closer, his reflection joining hers in the glass. Do you care what they think? Her throat tightened. I care about not losing myself. His hand lifted, tilting her chin toward him. You won't lose yourself. You'll find yourself with me. Before she could respond, he turned and drew her back into the center of the ballroom. Conversations faltered as a spotlight followed them across the floor. Emily's stomach dropped, panic clawing at her chest. Alexander, what are you doing? She hissed under her breath. He ignored her, his gaze sweeping the sea of faces. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him, the titan who rarely bared anything beyond cold precision. He took the microphone from the host, his voice carrying effortlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather for a cause greater than profit or power, he began, his tone steady. But before we continue, there is something I must say. Emily's breath caught as he reached for her hand, pulling her into the light. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This is Emily Clark, Alexander said, his voice raw with conviction. She is not just my date. She is my future. The room erupted in murmurs, whispers sharp as knives. Emily froze, her knees weak, her pulse thundering in her ears. Alexander turned fully toward her, ignoring the audience, ignoring the judgment. His hand tightened around hers as he sank to one knee. The sight stunned the room into silence. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a diamond ring that glittered like fire under the chandeliers. "Emily," he said, his voice stripped of every mask. "From the moment I saw you, I knew my life would never be the same. You tore down walls I thought unbreakable. You made me feel things I didn't believe I could. I don't want another night without you. I don't want a future that doesn't have you in it. Be mine. Marry me." The world spun. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as every eye in the room burned into her. She wanted to scream that this was madness, that she wasn't ready, that she couldn't step into a world where she barely fit. But when she looked at him, at the fierce vulnerability in his gaze, her heart cracked wide open, her lips trembled, tears stinging her eyes. "Alexander," she whispered, but her voice broke. The crowd held its breath. Alexander's gaze searched hers desperately, his hand steady despite the storm raging inside him. Emily shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "I can't. This is too much." Gasps echoed, some in shock, others in judgment. Alexander rose slowly, towering above her once more, though a flicker of pain cracked his flawless composure. He leaned close, his whisper fierce against her ear. "You can deny me in front of them if you must, but you can't deny what's between us. You're mine, Emily. Whether the world knows it now or later makes no difference." Tears spilled down her cheeks as the orchestra resumed awkwardly, the host reclaiming the microphone, trying to steer the gala back on course. But the moment lingered, etched into every witness. Emily clutched her trembling hands to her chest, her heart torn, between freedom and surrender. And as Alexander's arm wrapped around her waist once more, guiding her off the stage with unshakable confidence, she realized her life would never again belong solely to her. The days following the gala blurred into a whirlwind of headlines and whispers. Emily Clark's face was splashed across gossip magazines and finance blogs, her name suddenly tethered to Alexander Hayes in ways she had never asked for. Some painted her as a Cinderella figure who had captured London's most eligible billionaire, while others branded her a gold digger who had clawed her way into power. Emily shut herself away in her flat, ignoring calls, ignoring the messages that poured in. The weight of scrutiny pressed down like an invisible cage. Every article, every whisper reminded her of the night Alexander had dropped to one knee in front of half the city and declared she was his future. And every time she closed her eyes, she relived her own voice breaking, her own refusal whispered through trembling lips. When he finally came to her door, he didn't knock politely. He entered like a storm, closing the door behind him with quiet finality, his eyes dark and unyielding. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice calm, edged with danger. Emily stood rigid, her fists clenched at her sides. "What did you expect? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You asked me to marry you in a room full of strangers. I didn't even know how to breathe, let alone answer." His jaw tightened, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't care about them. I only care about you. And I meant every word. You are my future." Her chest ached, but she shook her head, tears threatening to spill. "Our worlds are too different. I'll never fit into yours. I don't want to become someone I don't recognize." In 2 strides, he closed the distance, gripping her shoulders firmly, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You don't have to change who you are. That's what makes you mine. I don't want polished perfection. I want you. The woman who fights for what she believes in. The woman who looks at me like I'm not Alexander Hayes, the empire, but just a man." Her lips trembled, her resolve cracking. "And what about when it gets hard? When the headlines get uglier? When the judgment doesn't stop? I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." His expression softened, though his hands stayed steady on her. "Then let me be strong for both of us. Let me protect you, the way I've wanted to since the moment I saw you." Silence stretched, thick with tension and choice. Emily's chest heaved as her heart warred with her reason. Finally, the truth she had fought so long to suppress broke through. "I love you, Alexander," she whispered, her voice breaking. "God help me, I love you, but I'm scared." His breath caught, his grip tightening as though to anchor himself to her confession. He lowered his forehead to hers, his voice fierce but trembling. "Then let's be scared together, because I can't imagine my life without you." Tears spilled down her cheeks as the last of her walls collapsed. She nodded, surrendering to the truth. Yes. Relief and triumph flashed in his eyes as he crushed her against him, kissing her with a ferocity that left no doubt she was his. The kiss was deep, desperate, sealing the vow between them. A kiss that spoke of devotion, of obsession, of forever. The chapel stood in the English countryside, its stone walls draped in white roses and ivy, its tall windows glowing with soft golden light. Guests filled the pews, a blend of aristocrats, business titans, and a few of Emily Clark's closest friends who still could not quite believe she was here, about to marry Alexander Hayes. Emily stood just beyond the doors, her breath trembling, as she clutched the bouquet. The satin of her gown shimmered under the morning light, delicate lace tracing her shoulders. She thought of the girl she had been only months ago, working double shifts, drowning in bills, too afraid to dream of anything beyond survival. That girl felt worlds away. The music swelled, and the doors opened. Emily stepped forward, her heart pounding as every head turned. But she saw no one, only Alexander. He waited at the altar, tall and striking in a tailored suit, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her with a hunger and devotion that stole the air from her lungs. Each step carried her closer to him, closer to the life she had once thought impossible. When she reached him, his hand closed over hers with fierce certainty, his grip unshakable. The vows blurred, but Emily would never forget the way his voice trembled slightly when he said, "I do," or the way his thumb stroked her hand as though promising more than words ever could. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, Alexander didn't wait. He pulled her against him and kissed her deeply, uncaring of the cheers and applause that echoed around them. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a vow, a claim, a promise of forever. A year later, sunlight poured into the garden of their estate just outside London. Children's laughter rang through the air, mingling with the soft breeze that rustled the roses lining the stone path. Emily sat beneath a pergola draped in vines, her hair loose, her smile radiant as she rocked a baby girl in her arms. Alexander stood nearby, his suit jacket abandoned, sleeves rolled up, cradling their son against his chest. The ruthless billionaire, who once lived only for power, now bent his head to kiss the top of his child's hair, his eyes filled with a softness few had ever seen. Emily watched him, her heart swelling. He had changed, not in the steel of his will, not in his hunger for control, but in the way he gave himself completely to her, to their children, to the family they had built together. When his gaze lifted, their eyes met across the garden. For a moment, the world stilled and Emily saw the man he had become, the man who had once claimed her with dangerous certainty and who now loved her with unshakable devotion. Alexander crossed the garden in long strides, leaned down, and pressed a kiss to her lips. "I told you," he murmured against her smile. "You were always mine." Emily laughed softly, her eyes misting as she whispered back, "And I was always yours." The sun dipped lower, bathing them in golden light as their children's laughter filled the air. And in that moment, Alexander Hayes, the man who had once lived in shadows of loneliness and power, finally had everything he never knew he needed. Not an empire, not control, but love. Forever.